Hey, I'm Omid Farhang, CCO at Momentum. Welcome to my talk. Live events will return, but will fans? Parentheses, it's a purposely incendiary title. Of course they will, don't be ridiculous. At Momentum, so much of what we do as an experiential agency is tethered to live sporting events and live music. So this is just a very early exploration into how the upheaval caused by coronavirus could alter the fan experience and how brands should start to think about the future of live events and activations moving forward. Okay, so before we start, I'm just going to stand up so you can see what I'm wearing here. This is my beloved Magic Johnson jersey that I've had since I was 12 years old. This was my Christmas present in 1992. One of the benefits of growing up a fat kid is all your clothes still fit you in adulthood. And I wear it to simply illustrate the emotional connection we have to sports, often starting in our childhoods. As societies fragment and competition for all our attention grows stronger, the one unflinching constant has been the world of live sports and music. Because of the passion they evoke and the way they promote community at every level, it is not hyperbole to say that live experiences are one of the most potent unifying forces at the core of mankind. And that's before we even look at it through the financial prism that, not including music, just sports alone are worth an estimated $700 billion and growing faster than global GDP prior to the shutdown. For all of these emotional, cultural, and financial reasons, brands have been increasingly invested in sports and music, and experiential agencies like Momentum have been by their side, using creativity to help brands make the most of their sponsorship dollars. For those of us who do live events and activations for a living, we live for the crowds. We live to see the reactions on people's faces. We live for the pressure of flawless execution with no second takes. We live to create experiences that don't just tell the story of a brand or product, but give people lifelong memories. We live for live. And now that live is on global pause, it is incumbent upon us as subject matter experts to begin anticipating what the future of live events will look like, both in the short and long term. And that really starts with anticipating fans' mindsets. The world broadly and experiential marketers especially are hopeful that live events will begin to bounce back in a post-coronavirus world as early as Q3 or Q4 of 2020. This will obviously depend on a variety of factors, foremost of which is the availability to widespread testing. Whenever live events return, experiential agencies like Momentum will certainly be ready. Brands with large sponsorship deals will be ready to seek value in the investments that they've made with leagues and teams. But the biggest question of all remains, how ready will fans be to return? So, I'm of two minds of this, kind of to kick us off here. On the one hand, enjoying live events is all about being in the moment. And I think fans are going to struggle to be in the moment if they are feeling understandably nervous about sitting tightly packed with strangers, even with social distancing measures in place. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how to combat this nervousness momentarily. On the other hand, psychologically, I think this has been a time for mankind on a global scale to experience newfound gratitude for so much we take for granted. Newfound gratitude for our health, for our loved ones, for our employment, for the basics of food, shelter, and safety. And so when the world returns to some semblance of normalcy, when testing is widely accessible, I expect fans to have a newfound gratitude for live sports and live music. For all the deep-seated emotional reasons I still have this raggedy-ass jersey after 30 years. For many, attending live events are going to kind of take on a newfound, profound significance. The enthusiasm and fervor in stadiums and arenas could be even more intense, and the passion for favorite teams and favorite players could really be heightened. And that's exciting. And just as fans will show greater appreciation for the leagues and teams will surely show greater appreciation for their fans. I think you're going to see more affordable tickets, lower price concessions, free or discounted parking, more free giveaways and special promotions. And most importantly for today's conversation, I think you're going to see greater openness to brand integration and the role brands can play. I think the economic repercussions of this pandemic are certainly going to be harsh. So the leagues that can wrap their arms around fans with maybe less disposable income early on are going to earn some major loyalty. So let's talk about, as fans slowly start to return to gathering live, what are those new rules of fan engagement? And before we even get into the role that creativity can play, I think first we have to address, how do we reduce fear and create a comfort level for fans to have confidence in their safety when they return to public gatherings? We're going to go ahead and assume state and federal government guidelines will put some rules in place, and we'll follow them all closely. But as an agency, we're thinking about, how can we go above and beyond what's mandated to bring fans heightened comfort? How do we become a thought leader in implementing a new set of best practices across all experiential platforms? So, led by our head of experience design, David Chamberlain, we've begun formalizing some new design guidelines with the ambition to become something of an official standard. And we want to do that in collaboration with other great agencies in our space. And that's important. You know, what's true for global heads of state right now is true for us, which is that this, more than ever, is a time for knowledge sharing, not for knowledge hoarding. So as we write these new rules of fan engagement, it's going to be things like proximity, you know, single seating, no couches, antimicrobial surfaces and materials, limiting fabric seating and surfaces that cannot be wiped down, reservation systems, timed experience to get people in and out, updated capacity guidelines, new ways of calculating capacity based off a 6-foot radius. It's going to be around disinfection, wiping down surfaces every interval of minutes, deep cleaning at night, hand washing stations, UV cleaners, hand sanitizer dispensers. Of course, this sounds obvious as I'm stating it, but you must understand that in the activation and live event space, these were not considerations at the top of the priority list just 2 months ago. And so we have to really think about these things differently. Things like, maybe we stop thinking about obviously putting people in tightly packed and closed spaces, which prior to coronavirus was a great way to create energy and intensity in a space, and thinking more open air, thinking more about opting for larger footprints. One of the main things that we do at live activations is get lead generation, and we do that with touch screens and iPads. One thing people are not going to want to be doing as they return to live events is touching screens. So you're going to see more QR codes, more airdrop, more text, and you're going to be seeing the limited role that brand ambassadors have in their interactions with fans and consumers. You're going to be seeing more no-touch activities, the adoption of more audio triggered, more facial recognition, more motion censored. You're going to be seeing us harnessing the power of people's device in their pockets rather than handing them external devices. All the way down to food service, more prepackaged, obviously more gloves and masks. You may see innovation in the vending machine space, innovation in the self-serve space. And as we're doing all of these things that, again, sound obvious, but that are new in terms of how we're prioritizing them, one of the most important things that we do is to very clearly message the steps that we're taking and making those messages highly visible so that fans in our space can understand that there's leadership and consideration at the wheel who are prioritizing their safety. Okay, so now that we've gone through some of those protocols and best practices, let's start to talk a little bit about the role creativity can play in helping brands sort of return to the live event and activation space. As we return to gathering, in some ways brands are going to face new limitations, and some of those are obvious, but in other ways, they'll be able to seize new creative opportunities. So what do I mean by that? One example at Momentum is that we've helped our clients at American Express activate at the US Open for over 20 years. And it is one of the great privileges that we have creatively on behalf of a longstanding client. But it can also be a daunting challenge to come back each year with new answers to the same basic challenge. So coming out of this crisis, you're going to see new unprecedented creative solutions. And that's going to be inevitable because we're going to be responding to new unprecedented challenges, new unprecedented questions and briefs. So you know what that means? That means that if you're a creative out there who has ever wished to completely disrupt live activation at a sporting event or at a music festival or at a trade show, this could be a career-defining moment for you, and you really have to see it that way. And it starts with asking the right questions. So I'm just going to take you through some of the questions that we're asking ourselves at Momentums in order to hopefully spur the right creative solutions. The first is this question of how to go from physical to virtual. We're doing this meeting virtually, and we're seeing a lot more adoption of virtual meetings and virtual gatherings. And at Momentum, we really believe that this adoption and normalization of virtual gatherings will be one of the real positive legacies of this crisis that will live on. For the past month, a lot of what we've been doing for our client partners is developing the strategies and creative approaches for transforming traditionally physical live events into live virtual experiences. And we're doing it on the thesis that virtual events should not attempt to strictly recreate the physical event on a screen, but rather to strive to achieve the same desired outcomes, but through wholly new insights that are exclusive to digital mediums. But as we do this, we must also do it without losing sight of the principles of experience design that make a traditional live event so special. So that's a lot of what we've been doing over the past month, and we've learned a lot. The next question we're asking ourselves is, how do we create high-touch experiences without touching? How do we touch you emotionally without requiring you to physically touch your surroundings? And this is where we really look to technology, and we covered some of that earlier on, but one of my favorite things about the activation space is that it's often one of the first places to showcase emerging technologies to the public. Before you ever dare to put on a VR headset in your living room, you probably put one on at an activation. But I would say sometimes our industry has been guilty of presenting technology posing as ideas. So as fans slowly start to make their return, we really need to think about technology less out of novelty and more out of necessity to facilitate safe fan experiences. Another question is, how do we create more intimate, exclusive event formats with fewer people? We may be mandated to gather in smaller groups for a while. So how does a brand show up in communities at smaller scale, but maybe at higher frequency? If sports initially return without fans, as a lot are suggesting will happen, how do brands elevate the home viewing experience for small groups of fans safely gathering in search of community and connection? So that's really potentially a new creative frontier in the activation space. That's exciting. Another question we're asking ourselves is, how do we double down on brand purpose? If you're watching this, you work in marketing, and if you work in marketing today, you talk a lot about brand purpose, and it's really important now. We must know our reason for activating, our reason for being, our why, and the answer must be unimpeachable and undeniable, or else we probably shouldn't be there. I have said about the activation space as an industry that at our most innovative, we are using creativity and technology not just to advance a brand message, but to blow people's minds and give them lifelong memories. At our least innovative, we are creating branded weddings and bar mitzvahs. When we come out of this in a post-coronavirus world, I think there's not going to be a lot of patience or use for the branded weddings and bar mitzvahs. So we really got to double down on brand purpose and know our why. I think this is another important question. It's a simple one, but how do we meet fans where they're at emotionally? We can't put people on the brand's timeline, despite the fact that brands may be eager to recoup the investments that they've made with leagues and teams. But we've really got to get on the timeline of the fans emotionally and help them take it slow. We've got to meet them where they're at. So this is really where agency strategists need to be mining new insights that maybe give the creative process a new starting point. Another question is, how do we show up big and show up small? So of course, we're going to show up to the big cultural events that have existed for decades, the Super Bowl, US Open, Olympics. But we also need to be thinking about how we show up at small local events, including small local events that don't exist yet, that we invent. When we work in activation, one of the filters that we put every idea through is these three questions. It's really simple. It's what's in it for the brand, what's in it for the property, the league or team, and what's in it for the fan. And I think coming out of this, we really need to add a fourth filter, which is what is in it for the surrounding community and community of small businesses. And one of the last questions we're currently asking ourselves is just this weighing the importance of physical throughput versus cultural throughput. If you're not in the live event and activation space, you may not be familiar with this word. Throughput essentially just means how many physical bodies move through and experience your space. And it has largely been the most important metric for success as we've activated with clients for decades. Of course, over the past 5 to 10 years, we've started to prioritize physical throughput, but in addition to how do you shoot your live event in such a way that amplifies it culturally and makes it imminently shareable. I often point to one of my favorite examples, which is Field Trip to Mars out of McCann World Group a couple years ago. And it is not an example of a sponsorship idea, but Field Trip to Mars is a great example of creating a live event for 15 kids, but shooting it in such a filmic way that it is not just about the experience of those 15 kids on the bus, but the 15 million who will be watching at home. So it really begs the question that we've already begun to ask ourselves in the experiential space, but we really must think about it at an even heightened level, which is instead of what can we repeat for the many in attendance, what can we do for the few in attendance that can deeply touch the many who will not be in attendance? And I'd like to just make my parting thought around this notion of broadening the definition of experiential. I'm just going to state the obvious that this is a very difficult time for all experiential agencies that have relied on live events. And every agency talks a good game about disruption and embracing change. This is a moment when we really reveal who we are as individuals and as agencies. Look, if embracing change were easy, it wouldn't be such a repeated cliche. It's really hard, and it takes courage. And it takes an understanding that no matter what your agency specializes in, at our core, our jobs are to figure out how to be of service to our client partners. So my advice is embrace the broadest definition of experiential, because I think the best thing about creativity is that it finds a way to shape shift to solve any problem that's in its way. Use your brain power, use your people power, use your creativity to be of service in new ways that continue to broaden the definition of experiential. And I think if you do that, you'll have not just moved your agency forward, but you'll have moved the industry forward as well. Thanks for joining me today.